Might I invite you to turn once again to the book of Joshua, the 6th book of the Bible, and turn it to chapter 1, and we'll continue our trek through this book. And we come this morning to the second pericope of the book, which encompasses verses 10 to 18 of the chapter. So, as you can see, we're dividing chapter 1 into two parts. In the first part, Joshua is commissioned by God. God sets him aside, speaks to him, and gives him the mantle of leadership. And now in the second pericope, it is time for him to take on that mantle of leadership. It is time for Joshua to arise, back in verse 2, to get up and to lead these people. And this is what Joshua will do. So what we have in this second pericope is the first acts of Joshua to obey the commission. All right, it's his job now to follow Moses and to lead the people of Israel to obey the commission that God gave him. All right, so in this second piece, what we're going to be looking at is first, he will address the western tribes of Israel, and then he will address the eastern tribes of Israel. And then in one final section, the people will address him. Now, I think that's the most important part of this chapter, and so we're going to spend most of our time in those last three verses, but I do not want to overlook the first two in which he addresses the various tribes. In verse 10 it says, Joshua commanded the officers of the people, quote, "Pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions. For within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess." You will notice that Joshua speaks to the officers of the people. It is highly unlikely that he would have been able to gather all of the Israelites and speak to them individually. And so he goes to the officers of each of the tribes, the tribal leaders, and he speaks to them. And his initial command, if I might paraphrase it, is he says, prepare yourself, for in 3 days you're going to cross the Jordan into Canaan. All right? So he gives them this initial command. It's time for you to get ready and cross the Jordan into Canaan. Now, why would he give them this command, and particularly 3 days to prepare? Because it would take more than 2 million people at least that much time to get ready. It's going to take 3 days to get ready, okay? They're going to have to pack their possessions. They're going to have to take down their tents. They're going to have to pack up all the stuff that they own, much of which they brought with them from Egypt. They're going to have to crate it up in some way and get ready to go. They're going to have to gather their flocks and their herds and their children, and they're going to have to prepare to travel again. Now, I said 2 million because it's, in my opinion, that this group of Israelites has grown dramatically, okay? And here's why. It's been 40 years since the Israelites first came to this place in order to take the land. Do you remember? Remember, it was Joshua and Caleb and the other spies that went in and said, you know, here's what's in there. And Caleb came out and said, we can take them. And the others said, no, we can't do it. And so that was 40 years ago. And God told them, you're going to wander in this wilderness until that generation dies in the wilderness. And so it's 40 years of time. Well, if you are a baby at the point that this initial spy takes place, how old are you now? You're 40 years old. And you've probably had children. And your children have probably had children. Okay? So during this 40-year period of time, these people are not just doing nothing. They're having babies. Okay? They're prolific. So the 1 million or so that come out can easily double. I mean, some scholars have suggested it's 3 or 4 million by this point, because not every couple is going to have just 2 children to double the number of people. Big families are the norm in Semitic tribes, and so what do you have? You have the real possibility that this thing could have blown up dramatically during this particular period. And so the number of Israelites is probably going dramatically. And during this 40 years, the people have gotten used to not traveling much or too far at a time. The total distance from Sinai to the edge of the Jordan, as the crow flies, is 250 miles. That's all it is. It's 250 miles from the low end of Sinai to Canaan. Even if we add another 100 miles just to not go as the crow flies, it's only 350 miles. If you average 250 miles over 40 years, how far did they go? 6 miles per year. So they're not used to traveling very far. Okay? They're used to going someplace and camping there for a while until the Lord would say, okay, it's time to move to the next place, and they pick up everything and move. You know what? It's possible, I can't prove this from the scriptures, but it's very possible that they could camp at one place for a decade. There were 4 decades that they were in this wilderness. It's very possible they could camp somewhere and stay there for a decade. So when Joshua comes to them and says, you've got 3 days, that could have been a panic moment. Whoa, we got to be ready in 3 days. Joshua says it's time to go. You and I think of 3 days as, I can easily get ready to go in 3 days. But this is a whole different scenario, and we have to keep that in mind. Joshua gives them what should be a reasonable amount of time to pack and get ready. But try to remember the situation that we're in here. They're about to pick up and move a whole lot of people all at once. And so this first command is 3 days, and we're moving on. But then he also says, you're about to take possession of a land that the Lord your God has given you to possess. So he tells them what they're about to do. They're not just going to travel again, okay? They're about to go into the land that their predecessors failed to go into. The entire purpose of leaving Egypt 40 years ago, and a promise made to Abraham 600 years ago, is about to come to pass. The whole reason that you came out of Egypt was so that you would come here, this particular land. You refused to do it 40 years ago, but now you're going to actually go across this Jordan and take a land that was supposedly yours even before. In other words, they're about to enter a land, they're about to follow him into a land that he himself had said they could. Back in Numbers 14, verses 6 and following. When Joshua and Caleb came out of the land, they said, we can do this. We can go in. Yeah, there's great, powerful people there. So what? Yahweh is on our side. They don't stand a chance. And the people went, ah! And they didn't go in. So you see the irony? Joshua is now going to lead them across now when he should have led them, or at least Moses should have led them 40 years earlier. The entire purpose of leaving Egypt is that you are about to go and take what is yours. It's time. That generation has fallen. We have buried their bodies in the wilderness. You, the children and grandchildren of those people, all of you, let's go and take what is yours. Now, this command that you see in these first few verses, 10 and 11, is given to the western tribes, okay? 9.5 of the total tribes of Israel, which is assumed, by the way, by the next statement in verse 12. And to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said. So I'm going to take it that verse 12 tells me that the command of 10 and 11 is actually given to the western tribes, and now Joshua comes and speaks to the others, all right? So I'm inclined to believe that this first command is to the western tribes. Now in verses 12 to 15, Joshua is going to turn his attention to the eastern tribes. Now, we need to do a little history here to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. All right? There's a little confusion here sometimes about this. You remember that God had originally intended that the land of Canaan, the land given to or promised to Abraham and repromised through Moses, would be divided amongst the 12 sons of Jacob. Okay? Originally, that was going to be divided amongst them. But there are two things that happen that God wishes to do. Number one, God superintends the Levites to not be given any specific land, but to live within the boundaries of all the other tribes. the Levites were set aside as a specific tribe that would be the helpers of the priests that came from the line of Aaron. Aaron and Moses were from the tribe of Levi. The priests would come from the family of Aaron. They would be the priests serving in the tabernacle. But the Levites, also of the same clan, would serve as helpers to the priests. And they would be scattered throughout all of wherever the Israelites would land. So the Levites wouldn't be given a specific area or territory. The Levites were to live around the major population centers of all the other tribes, so they would be scattered throughout Israel. God considered that an honor. Now, we might not look at it that way. We might say, well, wait a minute, they should have got some land too. But God elevated them to a position of great honor to serve Him directly around the tabernacle by living in the various places throughout Israel. And so He gave them that honor. And so they were not going to get a specific area. You find that in Numbers chapter 18, particularly in verse 20. Secondly, God also superintended to bless Joseph. Jacob had passed a blessing to Joseph because Joseph had protected the family of Jacob in Egypt. Jacob had then given a special blessing to his second youngest son, Joseph, by passing that blessing over Joseph to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so Joseph, per se, would not get a specific inheritance in the land, but rather the inheritance would go to two of his sons. And so, in a sense, Joseph would be getting the double portion because two of his sons would be getting an allotment of land. And this is all because of what Joseph had done in protecting the family of Israel in Egypt. You see this in Genesis 48 and verse 5. So what you have is the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, replace Levi and Joseph in the allotment. So it's still 12, except that 2 replace 2. The Levites are not given a particular space, and Joseph is given the double inheritance. All right, so that's an important thing to keep in mind as to how this is all being divided. When the Israelites then arrive in the territory around the Jordan, known as Gilead, it's the place to the east of the Jordan. Just as they arrived in that place before this time, the tribal leaders of the tribes of Reuben and Gad come to Moses and request that they be allowed to settle in the land to the east of the Jordan River in the valley called Gilead. They want to stay there. In other words, they all land there. The whole Israelite nation shows up in this place to the east of the Jordan, and the leaders of the tribes of Reuben and Gad come to Moses and say, you know what, can we just stay here? This is a really nice spot. And it is. On the other side of the Jordan, it's just as lush as it is on the western side of the Jordan. And so they're all going, you know, we could put our herds here and our flocks here and our children here, and we could live here. And so they come. Now, Moses perceives this as deja vu all over again, okay? Because he perceives it initially as, once again, the people of Israel refuse to cross the Jordan and go in. Again, we have some from Israel who are coming to me and saying, we don't want to go across, we just want to stay over here. And so he sees it as the people refusing to enter the land when God brings them into it, just as in the days of the spies. Once again, we see the same thing, okay? But the leaders of these two tribes, Reuben and Gad, promise Moses that they will send their fighting men with the rest of Israel across the Jordan until the western tribes are settled in Canaan. They will leave their families in fortified cities in the Transjordan, in the Gilead, and cross the Jordan with the rest of the tribes to fight before them. They make that promise. They say to Moses, yes, we understand your concern, that we want to stay here, and you're perceiving that as that we don't want to go into the promised land. But here's what we'll promise. We will send our fighting men in front of all of the other peoples that are going across to the western side. We'll go and fight with them until they're settled, and then we'll come back and we'll live on this side. And Moses accepts their request. But he solemnly warns them that failure to take up arms and cross with the rest of Israel would mean their destruction. God would destroy them if they did not keep this promise of sending their fighting men over. And so the leaders of the tribes of Reuben and Gad agree to those conditions. We will send our fighting men across. When it is time for the people of Israel to cross the Jordan, we'll go with them. Our fighting men will go before them. And we will fight alongside of our brothers in taking the land. Now, just as an aside, it is unknown why half the tribe of Manasseh is suddenly included in this arrangement. If you look at the text in Numbers 32, there's no reason given. Suddenly, the half of the tribe of Manasseh appears in this arrangement, and nobody knows why, even to this day. There's been a lot of speculation. I won't waste your time with it. We also learned that the fighting men of Reuben and Gad are able to return home once the initial conquest of the West is complete. In other words, they have promised that they'll go across, but they return home, and we see that in Joshua 13. The first 7 verses of the chapter, God speaks about how the conquest is only partially done, but then in Joshua 13:8, it speaks of the tribal leaders of Reuben and Gad going back, and half tribe of Manasseh going back home. The conquest under Joshua, you remember, only establishes the western tribes in the hill country. I think I've mentioned this before, that the initial conquest under Joshua allows the Israelites of the western tribes to move into Canaan, but they are limited to that spine of hill country that runs north and south through Israel. They're limited to that space, and you see it particularly in Judges chapter 1. The full conquest of all of Canaan to the west of the Jordan, including the Jordan Valley, the hill country, the coastal plain to the north towards Syria, to the south towards the Negev, all of that is finally completed only under David. When David finally when he finally overthrows the Philistines that are occupying the Mediterranean plains and takes the city of Jerusalem from the Jebusites. It's only then that the conquest is actually completed. So Joshua comes to these Reubenites, Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and he says to them, verse 13, "Remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land being the Transjordan area. Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain here in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you, and they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them." Okay? "Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it, the land that Moses the servant of the Lord gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise, which is in the east." Right? So Joshua comes in these verses and repeats the promise that these leaders of Reuben and Gad and half-tribe of Manasseh made to Moses when they first arrived in this place, and Moses accepted the agreement. "The Lord has agreed to give you this land to the east of the Jordan. While your wives and children remain here, the men of valor amongst you are to come with us." Now that word men of valor is probably those who are in the fighting age. Men of valor would be those who can cross and fight. I'm going to guess, based on Numbers 4, that this is probably men who are aged 20 to 50. That would seem to be the reasonable period in the life of a man where he could take up a sword and go across and fight. Okay, so it's likely that this would be the case, implying that some men would stay behind to protect the wives and children and livestock and so forth. The younger men under 20 and the older men over 50 would stay behind to protect the wives and children. And Joshua says to them, "You are to continue in the fight until the Lord gives rest to the western tribes." Now, what he means by rest is not perfect conquest, because that we know, as I said, isn't going to happen until the days of David. What he means is until the western tribes are sufficiently settled, until the initial conquest is over, until we have entered and taken over the main fortified cities that allow us to then begin to settle in the various places. You read the first couple of chapters of the book of Judges, you will discover that the Israelites are going to continue to war against the natives for many, many years. If this conquest begins in 1400, David isn't going to come to the throne until 1000. That's 400 years from now. So it's 400 years of conquest that's still going to take place. I don't find that to be a coincidence, by the way. 400 years in Egypt, followed by 400 years of getting into Canaan. It makes perfect sense to me that the Lord, in his sense of humor, would do exactly that. Make them work 400 years to get to the very place that he had promised them to get. Then and only then, Joshua says, will your men of valor be allowed to return to the land towards the sunrise. So, what do we see in these first verses 10 to 15? Joshua assumes command. Joshua assumes command. He gives his first set of orders to the people. He goes to the western tribal leaders and says, pack up, it's time to get going. He goes to the tribes that are planning to stay in the east. He goes to them and says, you need to put your men of valor forward. It's time for us to go. You need to keep your promise. Let's go. So he gives his first two sets of commands. First to the western tribes and then to the eastern tribes, which leads us to verses 16 to 18. This was one of those weeks where I had an original trajectory that I wanted to take from this chapter, and I had originally entitled this sermon, Joshua Assumes Command, but I changed it. As you can see in your bulletin, it's different. Now it reads, the people commission Joshua. The last three verses of the chapter are, in my opinion, the most significant in the pericope. It's interesting and important, of course, that Joshua would give these commands to the eastern tribes and the western tribes. But I think the real question that comes up is, why then does Joshua include these three verses after he writes about his initial commands? Why? Remember, the historical grammatical approach to Scripture asks such a question. Why did the original writer write this text to the people he was writing to? And you remember, this book is written, I'm assuming, by Joshua near the end of his life, and it's being given to people who are already in the land. It's not being given to a people that are still on the eastern side of the Jordan. No. This is at the end of Joshua's life. He's writing this after all of this is accomplished. And so he's writing to the people of Israel later. In other words, you could say he's writing to the people who will now live through the period of the Judges. And he's writing to them something. And when he writes this, he's writing to them. And as I read verses 16, 17, and 18, I find an interesting, dare I say fascinating, parallel between the words you find in verses 16 to 18 and the words you find in the first pericope of the book, God's words to Joshua. You find an interesting parallel between God's words to Joshua and the people's words to him. And the parallel is found at the very end of the chapter, when the people say exactly the same thing to Joshua that God said to Joshua twice. Be strong and courageous. Now that's one of those parallels you can't miss, right? It's one of those parallels you can't just pass over. There's got to be some significance to this, all right? And that's why I changed where I was going to go with this. Compare verse 18b in that last statement to verses 6 and 9 earlier in the chapter, and you will see the people repeat the words of God to Joshua. So here's my opinion of these three verses. The statement in verses 16 to 18, when the people answer Joshua, is a commissioning of Joshua by the people. Just as much as God's words to Joshua commissioned him first. It is a pledge of loyalty by the people to Joshua, but it is more than a pledge. Okay? It is more than a pledge. It is a promise that foreshadows something. It is a promise that foreshadows something, thus linking it to the reason why Joshua included it in this letter. Their statement in these verses then is 4 promises and a request. 4 promises and a request. So let's look at what they say. First, they say this: all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. They agree, they pledge to obey him in everything he commands them to do. Now, notice the way it's written. All that you have commanded us. Okay, it's past tense. I found that fascinating. You may not have noticed it, but I'm paid to notice it. This is past tense. All that you have commanded us, okay? Now, I believe that the reason why Joshua wrote that is because, again, when's he writing this? Later in his life. He's writing as sort of a past tense sort of thing. All that you have commanded us we will do. So he's writing as a reminder to future people. Remember the command or the promise that you made that you would do these things? Okay. So in a sense, he writes it in a past tense for that reason. The statement appears to be specific to what he has just commanded them, right? It appears to be specific. All that you commanded us. Okay, you told us to get ready. You told us we had 3 days to get up and get moving. And Reuben and Gad said, you told us to get up and get ready to go. Okay, we're ready to do that. We're going to do that. It appears to be specific to that. But the second half of the statement, wherever you send us, we'll go, is future tense. So the second half clearly implies that they were pledging to obey him from this point forward. So I think the past tense and the future tense here is designed to be a sense in which we have made promises in the past and we will keep those promises in the future. I think that's how it's written. So in other words, it's simply a pledge on the part of the people for them to obey him from this point forward. And what you get out of Joshua right about here is an eye roll. Yeah, right. Now, it doesn't say that in the text, but you can almost feel it, can't you? Yes, just like you obeyed me the last time we were here. Yeah, just like you obeyed everything that I had said we could do before. Doesn't say that doesn't say that Joshua rejected that, but you get the point, right? It's a pledge from a people that have not shown themselves to be very faithful in the past. So we need to take it with just a tiny bit of grain of salt. But nonetheless, there it is. Secondly, first part of verse 17. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Second eye roll, right? Yeah, because you were so loyal to Moses along the way. I mean, you spent 40 years in the wilderness because you refused to obey him. Your parents and grandparents all died and we buried them in the wilderness because you obeyed Moses. Yeah, right. But, nonetheless, even if we take this with a grain of salt, they agree to be loyal to him just as they were loyal to Moses. In other words, we transfer our pledge of loyalty from Moses to you. Okay, he's gone. We get it. You're the guy. That's a very modern way of saying what ancient Hebrews would say, but it's kind of that, right? You're the guy. We're going to follow you now. We used to follow Moses, but he's dead, or at least we think he is. So we're going to follow after you. So wherever you lead us, we'll go. Sounds like a song, right? He is gone, and we promise not to compare you to him, but we will follow your lead, whatever your style might be. Probably the greatest concern any man ever has in taking the pulpit from someone who leaves it. Well, the previous pastor didn't do it that way. That's a comparison. And so in a sense, what they're doing is they're saying, we're not going to do that. Hint, hint. This is one of those, what do they call them? I hate that when that happens. You know, when you tell the end of the story to people. Spoiler alert, thank you. Boom. Spoiler alert, they're going to do it anyways. Okay, they're going to compare, but nonetheless, we're going to follow after you. Okay, so they first agree, we will follow you, whatever you commanded us, whatever you tell us to do, we're going to do it, and we will be loyal to you, just as we were loyal to Moses, we're transferring it to you. But now notice the second half of verse 17. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Now that looks like a request, but in reality it's a pledge in this sense. They agree to follow him as long as he follows Yahweh, just as God had led Moses. Okay? We admit that Yahweh led Moses in the past. All right? So we're recognizing that your leadership is actually Yahweh leading you. You see it? They're saying, we pledge to follow you. We will go where you go. We will obey you as we obeyed Moses. And the reason we'll do that is because we recognize that Moses was being led by the living God. So we will follow you, but we will follow you only as long as you follow the Lord. You see what that's what they're saying. In other words, our following you is conditional upon something. But we're making a pledge to you because we're making a pledge to the one who's leading you, who is Yahweh. And then finally, in verse 18, or I say finally in the sense of the four pledges that they make, verse 18, part A, whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command him, shall be put to death. They pledge that their allegiance to him will be a matter of life and death. They're pledging their commitment to him insofar as they're saying, if anyone dares to disobey you, we will terminate him. That's how much we're committing to you. We're committing to your leadership. We're going to follow what you command us to do and where you command us to go. We're going to do so just as we did with Moses. We're going to do so because you're being led by Yahweh. And this is so important to us, we're going to actually kill people who will not follow you. Anyone who disobeys you, we're going to kill them. We're so strongly committed to your leadership that we will actually kill anyone who disobeys you along the way, including ourselves. Now, this will actually happen shortly after the people cross into Canaan. Fast forward to chapter 7, you will find the people of Israel killing a man for his disobedience. So they're making a pledge here that they're making life and death. This isn't going to be a matter of, yeah, we're making a pledge and we'll see how it works out. Nope, this is, we are committed enough to you to be willing to say, anybody who disobeys you, Joshua, whatever you've commanded, kill him. That's quite a pledge, if you think about it. But then comes the last part of verse 18, that point that I made a moment ago, only be strong and courageous. And I would say that this is the request, or this is the commission that they put upon him when they say to him to be strong and courageous, to stand up and lead them. Just as God himself had said at the beginning of the chapter, arise, be strong and courageous, so the people now will the same. We will follow you as long as you are strong and courageous before us. We are commissioning you to be strong and courageous. That's what we need for you to be. It's one thing for us to commit ourselves to you in every sense, even to make this a matter of life and death. But your side of the equation is to be strong and courageous, to obey the Lord and to follow after him. In other words, Joshua must model courage before them, for they will need it. Where they're going to get the example of courage that they're going to need when they go into Canaan and face the enemies that will try to destroy them. Where they're going to get that? Where they're going to get the example of that? Joshua, you need to be the guy. We're going to follow you and we're going to model ourselves after you. That's why we need you to be strong and courageous. Remember, that's what God told him. Be strong and courageous. No man will be able to stand before you. And so God, Yahweh himself, had already said to Joshua, I am going to work through you. I am going to be the instrument of power that's going to work through you. But you need to do your part, which is to stand up and do what you're supposed to do. And the people are saying the same thing. Joshua must model courage before them, for they will need it. In the end, I think Joshua includes this little paragraph to remind future generations of their need to remain faithful to this pledge, especially under future leaders that God would raise up. Those future leaders will be called judges in the very next book. He's leaving them a legacy of courageousness, of strength, of moral integrity and courage to face the enemies of God, even under the power of God, facing the enemies of the people, and he's doing so as a model for future generations of leaders that would come up after him, that God would raise up after him. So this pledge is universal. The pledge that these people are making is universal. It isn't just to Joshua. Yeah, it certainly is given to him. We will follow you as you follow after Yahweh, and we will make this life and death, and be strong and courageous. But you can make a very good argument that this pledge is universal. It is typical. It is an example for all future generations of those being led by men whom God would send. This isn't just for Joshua. Joshua's writing this at the end of his life in order to say, listen. I'm leaving the scene now. Just as Moses left the scene and you transferred your loyalty to somebody else, now I'm going to leave the scene. You're going to be transferring your loyalty to someone else. Remember this pledge. You promised that you would obey those that God sent, that you would go wherever you're sent to go, that you would obey them just as much as you obeyed me, just as much as I obeyed Moses, or you obeyed Moses. The Lord will be with whomever is sent. That's the essence of God sending leadership. He has promised he will send these men to lead you, and he will be with them. And you need to take this so seriously that it becomes a matter of life and death. Okay? So this is a universal pledge out of these people. It's not just to Joshua. He's writing it at the end of his life, including this passage to say to future generations of Israelites, do the same for the next leader that comes. The next guy in line, when I'm gone, make the same pledge and keep it to them. It's a typical example for all future generations of those being led by men whom God would send, including the Messiah. This is a universal pledge being given for all who would pledge their loyalty and allegiance to whatever man God would send, including the ultimate man he would send. You see, I see this not just as a commissioning of Joshua by the people, but also a prototype of what it means for the elect to commission Jesus. Now, you remember in my previous lesson, we talked about Joshua being a type of the Christ. I mean, carries the same name even, right? Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus, same name. But Joshua, you remember, is a foreshadowing in his role in leading a people. He's foreshadowing what it means to be a leader. He's foreshadowing what it means to be the one who would lead the elect. And these people are coming to him and making a commissioning. So how does this commissioning of Joshua by the people foreshadow Christ? If he's a foreshadowing, and this commission is to him, how does this commissioning foreshadow Jesus? And here's the answer. When we, the elect people of God, the elect people of Yahweh, come to Christ by faith, when we come to Jesus, we also commission him to lead us in the same way Israel commissioned Joshua to lead them. Now, the reason why I changed my title and why I went in an entirely different direction here was because this thought came to me during the course of this week of thinking about this text. This is really interesting, at least to me, about this idea of us commissioning Jesus. We don't normally think of it that way, do we? We don't normally think of ourselves as coming to Jesus and say, okay, all right, I will follow you if. All right? In other words, we need you to be, and we will follow you if, okay? But let me suggest to you that's exactly what we do. That's precisely what we do. When we empty our hands of everything except trust in this Christ, when we put aside all of our religiosity and self-righteousness and everything else, repent of our sin and walk up to this Jesus and to his cross with an empty hand of faith and say, okay, you're the guy. We commission him too. And we say to Jesus all of these things. Or at least we should. First, we agree to obey him in everything he commands us to do and everywhere he sends us to go. Does that sound familiar to you? Wherever he sends me, I will go. We talked about it last week. What does the Great Commission say? All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, and everybody said, go. We have a command to go. We have a command for us to go into the world and make disciples of all the earth. It's not a suggestion. That's a commission. Jesus commissions us, but we turn around and we say to him, wherever you send us, we will go. And by the way, this Great Commission isn't given to a handful of missionaries that go off to India. This is a commission given to every single one of us who calls upon the name of Christ to be saved. Because look, there are people all around you in your life who you have a responsibility to preach the gospel to in the hope of making a disciple. Don't think that this is some, foreign mission thing. That is the mistake that too many evangelicals make. Not my job. I'm not the evangelist. That's the pastor's job. No, we're all to be under the commission. So we all agree to obey him in everything he commands us to do. Look, you've heard me say this 1,000 times from this pulpit. There is far too much preaching in the church today that treats salvation, quote unquote, as simply a nod and a wink to Christ. Jesus is my friend. He's my pal. He's my example, right? And so I just believe in Jesus. But there's very little call in much of the preaching that we hear today to allegiance and obedience, which is at the heart of the gospel. We preach that faith is not simply a nod and a wink. We call faith an emptying of our hands to put ourselves completely into Christ's hands and say to him, command me, O Lord. Take up your cross daily and follow after Christ is not a suggestion in the gospel. It's the essence of the gospel. Obedience to Jesus is an optional. Why do you call me Lord and yet not do what I say? Doesn't make sense. No. We agree when we come to Christ. We will do whatever you've commanded us to do, and we will go wherever you command us to go. That's the essence of coming to Christ. And look, if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to follow Jesus and be obedient, then just stop calling yourself a Christian, okay? Just stop. Because only those who make Christ absolute Lord are actually saved by him. Why does he say, I never knew you to so many? Because they did not do the will of my Father in heaven. They were not obedient. They were not loyal to Christ. This is one of the first things we say in the gospel. Yes, Jesus, I have dropped all of my pretense to religiosity and self-righteousness to come and put myself utterly in you. That's first and foremost in the gospel. We say that. We commission Jesus to that. Secondly, we agree to put all previous allegiances away to be loyal to him. Just as we obeyed Moses, we will obey you. When we come to Jesus, we say, just as we used to do this and that and have allegiance to this or this and that, we're putting all of that behind to follow you, including our allegiance to sin. We're putting behind us our allegiance to those things that we love more than we love you. We will love you more than we will love our own sin. We're making that pledge when we come to Christ. We profess allegiance when we say with the Apostle Paul in Romans 10:9, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. Okay, I've said it. Jesus is Lord. Guess what that means? All other lords no longer have my allegiance. None. There can be no allegiance to a sin that's your favorite. There can be no allegiance to another person, a politician, a writer, a preacher, whatever. Him and him alone. Just as the Israelites said, we're done with Moses. We're following you. We come to Jesus and we say, we're done with everything else. We follow you. Thirdly, we agree to follow Jesus because we recognize him as Yahweh. What did the people of Israel say? Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Well, we have something far greater than that. The Israelites recognized the presence of activity of Yahweh around Moses and in Moses, right? Yes, we saw Yahweh in Moses. And that's great. That's why we followed him, because we saw it in him. And we want to see it in you. And we say to Jesus, and we want to see God. Oh, we see God in you because you're our God. We admit, we agree to follow him because we recognize him as Yahweh. Our trust in Jesus as our Savior is based on the conviction that only he can lead us to the Father. That only he can lead us to the Father. No man can lead you to God. Because no man knows the way to God. No man of this world, in his rebellion and his sin, can lead you to God. So our allegiance must be to one who can, and only God himself, in the form of the God, man, can do so. We follow after Jesus because we see Yahweh in him. We don't just see Yahweh working through him in some sort of magical way. We see Yahweh when we look at Jesus. We see the creator of heaven and earth in Christ. And we say, that's the one that we follow. Because all the rest are fakes and substitutes, but that's the one that can lead us to Yahweh. Just as Moses was led by Yahweh, so we're going to follow you as long as you're led by Yahweh. And we say to Jesus, we'll follow you as long as you are Yahweh. And how long will that be? And then, fourthly, we agree that following Jesus is a matter of life and death. Now, I agree, we don't run around killing people who don't believe in Jesus. The Israelites said, anybody in the camp that doesn't obey, we'll kill them. And we're not going to do that. That's just a little over the edge. That's kind of like crusade time, remember? No, we're not going to do that. No, but we are going to recognize that following after Yahweh is a matter of life and death. Because those who follow after Yahweh will find life, and those who do not follow Yahweh will die. Oh, we don't have to kill them. The judge of all the earth will do that. He will cast them away into eternity of hell. But what we recognize when we come to this Jesus and commission him and agree to follow him, we agree that this is a life and death decision. This is a life and death reality. Why is it that the evangelical church does not get that? Following Jesus is some sort of magical mystery tour. It's like a ride on the Small World ride at Disney World. You get off and you go, what was the point of that? Except you have that song stuck in your head for the rest of the day. That's how evangelicals treat the gospel and their relationship to Jesus. Come if you want. You don't need to. But that's not how the Bible presents coming to Christ. No, coming to Christ is a matter of life and death. Only those who come to Christ will live. Those who do not, they will perish. They will perish. There will be judgment. And so when we come to Christ, we're saying the same thing. We agree that our decision to trust in Christ is a matter of life and death. We agree that our allegiance to Jesus is a matter of life and death. And we admit that life in Christ is found only in allegiance all the way to the end. That we must stay faithful to this Christ in all of life. Come on, I've spent a lot of time from this pulpit talking about apostasy over the last couple of years, haven't I? Because we are living in a day of massive apostasy going on in the church right now. Of so many people, ordinary people that you've never heard about, who are abandoning the Christian faith. Well, I don't really like Jesus anymore, and I certainly don't like that church over there, so I'm just going to not be a Christian anymore. Okay, you know what? Thanks for being honest. But here's the thing. It's a matter of life and death. And if we don't follow this Christ in our allegiance all the way to the end and stay faithful to Him all the way to the end, we will surely die. It is a matter of life and death. But there's one more thing that we do when we come to Christ. And that is that we go to this Christ, we go to Jesus, and we say to Him, I will follow you as long as you are strong and courageous. Now that seems really odd to say that, doesn't it? Because we just sort of assume He is, right? But in reality, for these Israelites to come and commission Him to be strong and courageous, there is a parallel I want you to see here. As the Israelites commissioned Joshua to stand in the face of hostility and lead them forward, what did the Israelites need? They needed someone to go before them into hostile territory and to model courage and strength before them. Joshua, we're going after you. We're going to follow you. So take us into hostile territory, lead us up to the gates of Jericho, and show us what needs to be done. Model the courage that it's going to take to accomplish this in the face of our enemies. They're going to meet a lot of enemies along the way. A lot of enemies. But Joshua would have to lead them into the face of those enemies and help them to conquer those enemies under the power of God. And that is exactly what we say to Jesus. We commission Him to lead us as we face the enemies of our faith. Lead us. We need you, O Christ, to be strong and courageous and to model before us the power that it will take for us to stand against the enemies that are coming. We too commission Jesus to guide us forward through this life of constant temptation to both sin and apostasy. I believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, all of us are going to be tempted to apostatize the faith more than ever before in the history of American culture or Western civilization. A massive attack is being launched against us by the devil to cause us to recant our faith and to embrace, or better, not just to recant our faith, that's too easy, but just to slip into a state in which our faith becomes irrelevant as we now begin to celebrate and advance all of the basic cultural and secular assumptions, right? We're going to be tempted. There's enemies out there. And we come to this Jesus and we put our hands in Him and we say to Him, use your strength to hold us fast to the end. Just as the people came to Joshua and said, you need to lead us, you need to model the strength for us, you need to tell us where to go and how to get there, and you need to be strong. We go to Jesus and we say, you need to be strong. Lead me. Save me from my own enemies, most of which are in my own heart and mind. We are told in Hebrews 7:25 that Jesus is our constant intercessor. What is He doing? He lives to make intercession for those who draw near to God, such that he is able to save them to the uttermost. What is he doing when he stands before his Father and intercedes for me? He is saying, that one is mine. I'm holding this one. This one belongs to me. He lives to intercede for us, to hold us fast before his Father. And when we come to this Jesus with an empty hand of faith, we are admitting, you, Jesus, have the strength to hold me in these days. I'm trusting in your strength. Not mine, yours. So it's perfectly reasonable for us to say to Jesus, be strong and courageous. And he nods and says, oh, I so am. I'm more courageous than you can possibly imagine. And I'm stronger than you can possibly imagine. See, we commission Jesus too. When we come to Jesus, we're like these Israelites. He tells us, Jesus does, he tells us, come to me, and I will give you rest. Put down your good works and your self-righteousness and your religion and everything else that you think is going to make you right with a holy God. You set those things down and you come to me and you trust in me and you follow me. And we turn to him and say, we will follow you. We will go wherever you tell us to go. We'll do whatever you tell us to do. We'll put aside all those previous allegiances that we have. We'll get rid of those. We'll trust that you are God himself, able to lead us. We will believe that this is a decision that is a matter of life and death. And so we just need you, O Lord, would you be strong and courageous for us? And he says, come. Put yourself under my strength, and I will lead you through the enemies. The people commissioned Joshua. The elect commissioned Christ.